typically. In public schools, people tend to know, and that's on their records, but we don't always know until they walk in the office and say, I'm here. And so that does make it difficult for us because we have students who are just now showing up. And so then if you get a letter from us next week, you're like, well, those lazy people over there, what are they doing with, why did they not let me know before now? And it's because until the student says, yes, contact my instructor, we really are limited in what we can say and do. Yeah, the laws are very different from K-12 to college. And a lot of students come in thinking that we already know. They think that their guidance counselor from high school told us. Well, the guidance counselor sends a letter to admissions, but we're not allowed to use that information during the admissions process. So everything goes into the admissions file, and so we don't know. And a lot of times they think that we do, but we don't know until they actually show up in our office. And some people take the proactive stance and go ahead and contact us and get in touch with us, which is good. It gives us more time to get in touch with you all. Because some people, it's very minor things, but Elise, as we were talking earlier, has a deaf-blind student in an online course this semester. So we're going to be best buds.
I've had several letters notifying me that the students are eligible for help, and then the students don't request me. I mean, I always follow up, but I think maybe for some of them it's good to have it in case they need it, but they haven't needed it.
And that's what a lot of students do. They really do. They wait until, like we've had students in the middle of the test go, but I have a disability. And we're like, gosh, you should have let us know before the test so we could have made the arrangements, And
what kind of percentages are we looking at?
As of today, we have 784 students registered with our office, which is, maybe 5%, maybe less of the student population. And we would anticipate about 10%, which you would anticipate for a campus our size, 2,500 to 3,000 students. So the fact that our numbers are so low is a huge concern for us.
So you find that those people that aren't utilizing?
Yes. Yes. That we know for a fact that there are a lot of students who go to faculty and say, I have a disability, will you give me extra time on a test or whatever? And they don't have the letter from our office. And you really shouldn't do that, which I know sounds cold and cruel and heartless, but sometimes we've told students, no, this is not an appropriate accommodation for you, but they want it anyway. Or sometimes they ask for things that, like we had a student who was blind who was in a class and he needed a scribe. And he didn't want to use our office, so he told the teacher, said, well, why don't you just let me and my friend here take the test together and give us the same grade? And the instructor agreed to it. Yeah, I know, I was in shock. And the instructor didn't say anything to us about it until the end of the semester, when he began to realize that the student who didn't have the disability was doing all the work, and the student who was blind was reaping the benefit. But by then it was too late really for him to do anything because he had agreed to that. And so, we want students to be independent. We want them to earn their grades like everyone else does. And so it made for some unique, hard feelings. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Is that okay? All right. My name is Karen Pettis, and I'm the Director of Disability Services here. And I will tell you, just to follow up a little bit, we have about 784 students who have they self-identify with our office. Of that group of students, about 50% of them have learning disabilities of some sort that have been documented. We have a large number of students who have attention deficit disorder, and that can range anywhere from people like me who can't sit still and constantly are flipping with a pen or doing something, to people who can sit perfectly still and you would never know, but in their minds, they're in another world doing something totally different, but they can sit perfectly still. We have a large number of students with psychiatric disabilities, and this is a group in particular that is growing exponentially. And these are things like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder. We have currently a student with multiple personality disorder. It can be a wide range of disabilities. And some students don't really need any accommodations from the faculty member per se. The kinds of things they need from us are things like taking a reduced course load but being able to keep their scholarship, or having a living situation where they're in a room by themselves, or in a room where they don't have a hall bathroom, or those kinds of issues. We have a very, very small population of students who are deaf or hearing impaired. We have one student who uses an interpreter who is in a program in Greenville, and another student who is a deaf teacher here in town. And you know how programs offer courses that are geared specifically for teachers, for teacher recertification. So we provide an interpreter for her, but the class doesn't actually meet on campus. We have very few students who are deaf. We do have one student in Library and Information Science who's deaf-blind this semester, and that's been a new challenge for us in figuring out how do you make programs online accessible to someone, and we use a lot of technology and some other things to do that. We have I don't think we have anyone right now who uses Braille. I think everyone who is visually disabled tends to use enlarged print, or maybe just electronic books, but not where they need things converted into Braille. And then another group that is just growing faster than we can figure out are students with health issues. A huge number of students now with diabetes. And some of the things that impact them in the classroom is being able to eat or drink, depending on if your class is a 3-hour class that meets, once a week, versus a class that meets, 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. But if their schedule is such that they have 3 classes back to back to back, then we may say they may need to eat some peanut butter crackers or something, or knowing what to do in the case that someone has a seizure in your classroom. And we try to notify instructors of those kinds of things individually and very specifically. Do this, do that, contact us, those kinds of things. So I guess the biggest message, if you walk out of here today with anything, is to recognize that as our numbers are growing, it's no longer possible for our office to ensure compliance for the entire campus. It's got to be a collaborative effort. We've all got to work together to make this happen. And so a lot of what I want to talk about today are ways that we can better work together. When you get a letter from us that says you have a student with a disability in your class, or the flip side, we get a large number of referrals from faculty because the student comes in either not thinking that their health condition is a disability, or not thinking, or thinking that their school has already contacted the instructor and they're asking for accommodations, and you may not have received an email from us. So, at that point, please call us, email us, stop by our office, something, and let's sit down and talk about ways that we can all work together. We've had faculty who've contacted us and said, remember last year I had a student with a learning disability and they transposed their E's and their R's, or, I'm like, yeah, I remember. Well, I have another one, but I haven't gotten a letter from you yet. And I'm like, well, let's talk about ways you can help get that student over to our office so that we can help put things into place for them that might be helpful for them to use or to be aware of, so that, when they do hit a problem or a situation, they know who to go to, and we're not trying to put some things together at the end of the semester, the last day of classes, to try to help them out. So please feel free to call us at any time. There are times when students have said to us, I do not want my faculty to know because I don't want to be treated differently. And I think that's probably students' biggest fear, is they don't want to be pointed out that, everybody else except for Julia over here is going to take the test and Julia's going to do something different because she has a disability. And we've had that happen a time or two, and students are very embarrassed and they're very hurt, and we want to try to avoid that. But at the same token, we want to support you. So while I may not be able to talk to you specifically about a student, I can always talk to you about university policies and procedures. I can give you advice. I can serve as a consultant to you on here's some things to think about, here's some things to keep in mind. You know, if you reach a certain level, you need to get us involved, and here's what we can do to help you out. We don't want to just leave you stranded. So we're trying to protect the rights of the students, but be a good colleague and a good friend for you all too. I would say that the most used accommodation on campus is test proctoring, being able to take your test in a room where it's quiet, where there aren't a lot of distractions. If you talk to anybody on my staff, they will tell you that I am tragically ADD. I should have been on a Ritalin drip when I was in elementary school. You know, I could go in and take a test. I could tell you what all 400 people in that room had on. I could tell you who used a yellow pencil, who used a red pencil, but by golly, I could not tell you how many questions were on that test. I mean, that just was not how my brain was going to function. And so if we can take students sometimes from those situations and put them in a quiet room where they can concentrate on the test, they're going to do better. Now, they may not do significantly better, but they're going to, at least they will feel good about their performance. But what has happened over the last couple of years with the budget cuts is we've more and more students, more and more tests. We have no new staff and no new space. Last year, we proctored 1,222 tests in our office. We ran out of space. We had people evenings and weekends. It was just kind of a mess. And the worst case scenario, a lot of faculty will tell us, I want the student to take the test at the same time as the class, which we do understand because they don't want to make two tests, because 9 times out of 10, the second test is not equally as difficult or equally as easy as the first test. And they want to make sure that people aren't cheating, which we understand completely. And so if you are in a classroom, and I'll use even numbers because that's how my brain works, from 10 to 11, and then somebody else is coming in at 11:15, you may not have the place to give that student the extra time. But at the same token, to say to a student, start the test here, and then when class is over, you can come to my office, that kind of breaks the student's train of thought because they're having to gather everything up and go someplace else, and you know. So we have tried to proctor tests in our office, but we just can't do it anymore. We need help. I don't know how else to say it except we need help. So if you have a student who has attention deficit disorder, has a learning disability, and just needs that extra space, if you can do it in your office while you're doing the test for everybody else, or if you have a secretary or someone who has a quiet place, and that's the key. Because a lot of students will come back and tell us, I was in Dr. So-and-so's office, but he was on the phone the whole time. Well, that's not a quiet environment, and that's just as distracting, and so they really haven't had their accommodation. But if you've got a place that you can do it, or if you've got, sometimes nursing, we had a group of 7 students who went through together, so they all 7 had the same test on the same day. You know, they would all come over to the office together. If you've got a conference room like this or someplace where you can let the students take the test over there, it's really better for everybody. You're not having to traipse over to our office. We're not having to get the test back to you. But even more importantly is how many times do students come in and say, what do they mean by this question? I'm not a nursing instructor. I can't even say subcutaneous, much less explain to you what this question means, you know? And heaven forbid you ask me a math question. Oh my gosh. You know, I'm more problems than I'm help. And so everybody else has the opportunity to ask you a question. What did you mean by this? Or I don't understand this question. So then we just have to either try to call you, but if you're in class giving your test, you're not going to answer your cell phone, or send you a message later and say, the student had problems with number 10 because we didn't understand. Now, I'll tell stories. Anybody from nursing? Because we love the nursing school. We got along really well with them. But one day, they sent over the wrong test. It was one of those mistakes everybody makes. They pulled the wrong test. And so the students are over there, nobody wants to say anything, and they're all taking this test, but we can tell they're all like, what the heck is going on? So finally, one of the brave students got up and went to Charlotte and said, I don't think this is the right test. So then we scrambled, and sure enough, about that time, here comes somebody from the nursing school in panic mode. They had sent the wrong test. But now these poor students have sat there for 30, 40 minutes, you know, trying to figure out what all they missed. How did they miss this? They have a timeline to get back for their class for a discussion. You know, we ended up having to proctor the test for them at a different time and later on. But those kinds of things do happen. And if you're in the class, you know, if all of us are taking the same test and I say, hey, I don't understand this, and you go, oh, that's right, I made a mistake. The answer should be, or this question should be, well, everybody else hears that and knows that, except for the student who's over in our office who doesn't have access to that information. So the more that you can do to help us out, that would be wonderful. And if you have a student that needs a scribe, someone to write for them, or they need to use assistive technology, by all means, send them on over. We'll let them take the test. We'll email it to you. We will fax it to you. You know, we can work out the logistics of it, because I know parking is an issue by our office. Some people are down in Swearingen. It's a long way to our office. But we'll work with you as best we can to make it easy for everybody involved. But I would say test proctoring is probably the #1 accommodation that students use and need. The next one is note takers. We have a number of note takers. And what we try to do is set up note takers for students who physically cannot take notes for themselves. If you have a learning disability or attention deficit disorder and the note taker might be helpful, most likely we're going to issue you a smart pen, which is one of those new nifty little pens that has the recorder in the pen, and as you take notes it records what's going on, and then when you go home you can put the pen and it will replay what was said so you can hear it again. It's a really nice thing. So if you have difficulty writing, all you have to do is write a 1, but it's going to keep recording, which is very nice. A lot of faculty tell us they're very concerned because we'll send them an email, would you please make this announcement in class? And so they make the announcement or they send it an email and nobody responds. And so we have difficulty sometimes getting students to volunteer to be a note taker for another student in the class. And what we found is students tend to respond more to faculty if you ask them specifically. If, you know, if I were to say, Jed, Rebecca needs a note taker, would you mind making a copy of of your notes for her? They're more likely to say yes than if you just say, hey, somebody needs a note taker, sign up. Students can come over to our office, make a copy of their notes. They can go home and scan them and email them to the student, whatever works best. We don't charge them to make the copies. I know sometimes it's a hassle to come to our office to make those copies. There are a lot of different things we can do. If you want someone from our office to come and make that announcement, we're fine doing that, and we'll be happy to do that. We don't hold faculty accountable for the quality of the notes, and a lot of people that, well, I don't know if this person would be a good note taker or not, or I don't know who to ask. You know, we just need somebody, and we can work with them on the quality of the notes or those kinds of things. But that's probably the next biggest concern we have. The final thing I want to kind of share with you all, and then get some questions and feedback from you all. Huge topic the last couple of years has been attendance. And the university, I don't know if you all know, has sort of tweaked the attendance policy a bit. Were you aware of this, Jed? I was not either until we've had 2 OCR complaints this past year. That's Office of Civil Rights. If a student feels like their civil rights have been violated, they can file a complaint, and then they'll send in an attorney who'll kind of get your side, our side, the student's side, and try to figure out, okay, how can we fix this? And both of the complaints involved attendance. Used to, the attendance policy very much said, you're either in class or you're not. Too bad. Well, now it sort of has a statement that talks about taking into consideration if they're in the hospital or if they're sick or doctor's excuses and those kinds of things, which puts a little more onus on the faculty to have to make some decisions. Is this a valid attendance issue or not? Is this one I'm going to count? Should it impact the grade or not? And I think it makes faculty a little uncomfortable at times. For some students with disabilities, having extra attendance, having extra absences may be something that you should consider. But it's not something that we're going to say to a student, yeah, you don't have to go to class ever, don't worry about it. And we're not going to put in the letter, that initial letter that says, Karen doesn't have to go to class, just make sure she passes the class. We're going to deal with things on a case-by-case basis. So we dealt with a lot of situations in the fall with the counseling center where students had to be hospitalized towards the end of the semester. And we had some faculty who said, yeah, I'll work with them, I'll give them an incomplete, let them make up the work or whatever. And then we had other faculty who were like, I don't care, too bad that, you know, they're going to fail the class because they don't take the final. But the student was in the hospital, so we've had to kind of work with them on those situations. But sometimes students will say, you know, I can't come to class because my bipolar disorder or because of that. And some of the questions that we're going to ask you is, what are you doing in class? If all you're doing is lecturing and there's not interaction, then we might say it's reasonable if they can read the material and pass the test and you're not doing anything in the class that requires their presence, that might be reasonable. In University 101, where so much of it is classroom interaction with other people, being present for a presentation and then talking about that, absences are going to be much more critical there. So we might say you can have less absences there because some things are going to be more difficult to make up than other things. But we'll contact you, or if the student contacts you, you're never wrong to say, let's call Disability Services. You're never going to go wrong calling us. And maybe the three of us sit down and talk about it. And there have been situations where we've said, no, this absence is not appropriate. It's not a reasonable accommodation. We're not going to support it. Other times we've kind of said, okay, what's something else that the student can do to demonstrate that they've mastered this material given that they've been in the hospital for 3 weeks? Can they do a paper? Can they do a site visit somewhere? Is there something that we can do that's an alternative method to show that they have mastered this material? And it's all done on a case-by-case basis. So, you know, we can't say, well, this is what we did last year, so this is what we're going to do this year. It just all depends. And I know that's difficult sometimes because what we hear from faculty is they want to be fair. And we want to be fair too. We don't want to water down the curriculum. We don't want people to feel like anyone's getting a grade. But at the same token, we do want to take into consideration that students with disabilities have other issues that may need to be taken into consideration. The other thing real quick, when you're dealing with a student, I would encourage you to be respectful in what you say, because in both of the OCR cases that we're dealing with right now, faculty made some comments that were very hurtful personally to the student, that you know, somebody with your condition doesn't need to be in school anyway. Those are kind of not good things to say to a student. That's just kind of throwing fuel on that fire, you know. And so you do kind of want to be careful sometimes and not pointing, you know, not calling attention to the student in class. Well, everybody did okay except for that stupid kid over there with LD. And those are quotes. Yeah, I know. Every now and then I'm like, they really said that in front of other people. It's kind of surprising. And then just this past week we had a situation where one of our students who's a wheelchair user was in a class, and she was asking a lot of questions, and the faculty member was engaging her in answering the questions. After class was over, one of the non-disabled students went up to her and said, I hope that you don't think that just because you're in a wheelchair you're going to be able to do this every class session. Yeah, yeah. And so, you know, treating people respectful and courteously, you know, is an important thing as well. And so sometimes it's the faculty member and sometimes it's the students, but making sure that, you know, in your classroom people are respectful. So that's pretty much the things that I thought, you know, you might most be interested in. Are there things that you all have run into that you have questions about, or things that I didn't touch on that you think might be helpful?
I have a question about the accommodation that you did one of these scenarios. What is the obligation of the faculty, and if they do not comply to accommodate the individual, what can happen?
Well, there are times when we sit down and talk with a student at the beginning of their time here, we talk very generally about accommodations. But then sometimes students can get into a class where maybe that accommodation isn't appropriate. A lot of students, and I'm trying to think of a good example. If you're in a class, say, where typing is an issue, and there's a journalism class where being able to type so many words a minute is a requirement. At first, that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. It was like, why should it make a difference whether they type 45 words a minute or, you know, 55 words a minute or 30 words a minute? And so we would just go ahead and say, no, that's not appropriate. And then we would get to talking with the instructor, and we would find out, well, there are certain deadlines that have to be made, certain things that have to be done in this timely of a situation. If they can't type this fast, they're not going to be able to meet this criteria. And then you're like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense now. But 2 to 3 semesters down the road, students just sort of assume that the same accommodations that applied last semester apply this semester, and we don't always have access to your syllabi, which I think is something we may start saying, hey, you've got a student with a disability, send us your syllabi now. Because there are some things in some situations that it may be appropriate to say no, and that's okay, but you probably want to know it from us. Because I think a lot of faculty and a lot of students think, oh, you can't tell me no because I have a disability, and if you tell me no, my mom's going to call you. And so there may be some times that no is the appropriate thing to say, but I always tell people never say never. Just say, let's sit down and talk. Let's talk about this. Let's see what we can come up with. Let's see if we can work together. Because the most important thing, I think, is to keep open lines of communication between the faculty member and the student and with us, so that we can deal with situations as they arise. And there may be some give and take on both sides. Well, we need you to do a speech, but we know because of your social anxiety disorder that standing in front of the class, it's not going to go well. So how about if we tape record your lecture in a room by yourself, and then we show the tape to the class? That might be a reasonable accommodation. Do you have a specific example that you're thinking of?
I'm just thinking if a professor just flatly says no. You know, one of the ones that you mentioned earlier could just say, well, no, they don't deserve to be in school or whatever.
Heard
that. So I'm not going to make any accommodations. So I'm just curious, under the law.
Typically what we do first is I will contact the instructor and see if we can work something out. And if that doesn't work, then I'll go to the department chair. And usually the department chairs are pretty good about saying, we'll take care of this. Occasionally I've had to tell faculty that when you tell a student with a disability no to something that we have approved, they can't just come in and say, I want you to guarantee I'm going to make an A on my test. It has to be something that's been approved by our office. If they sue, first of all, they sue the university. Well, there's a long process, but they file an OCR complaint, and then OCR will say, yes, you have a complaint, or no, you don't, and then they can sue. If the university can show that you were told to provide this accommodation and you did not, then the suit is now between you and the student, and the university is backed out of it. Because I've had faculty say to me, oh, they'll sue the university and they'll take care of it and they'll settle, and I'm like, no, you have violated someone's civil rights personally, and so they're going to come after your house and your car and your boat. Then people kind of are like, okay, what is it you want me to do? And so that's how serious this can be. Most of the time what happens is, like in these two situations, the students filed complaints with the Office of Civil Rights. The Office of Civil Rights came back to Bobby Guest And then, you know, we provided him with the information from our office. He's contacted the faculty and the deans, and they provide information. And then Henry White or one of the other attorneys prepares the university's response. We send it back to the Office of Civil Rights, and then they read the response. And sometimes they come back and say, okay, the student clearly didn't do what they were supposed to do, or the faculty didn't do what they were supposed to do, and here's what you need to do. And sometimes they'll come back and they'll say, we're coming down to do an investigation, and then everybody's in an uproar. And occasionally OCR has awarded damages to a student if it was, you know, like telling a student who's deaf that you're not going to provide an interpreter for them, or something that's very, very egregious. They'll just say, you know, the student was damaged here, you know, and you have to pay. But we haven't been in that situation here in the 16 years I've been here. We've never had one that we've had to pay. It's usually just been let them retake the course or let them retake the test or that kind of stuff, whatever it was. But we, you know, faculty do on occasion do say no, and we try to serve as the mediator, I guess.
Do you have a couple of physical disabilities?
Yes.
Okay, that's in the same office?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I had a student, and it's not a complaint with the student in your office. I'm concerned about the student having access only policy, and it's extremely difficult. They closed one of the lots to put the Dartmoor school.
Yes.
And they have an increased number of handicapped slots. And we have 4 faculty in my department who have handicap stickers. This student can't find a parking place, and they added additional parking for handicapped in the C lot, which would mean she would have to go up 2 flights of steps, and she's in a scooter. It's just, there's not enough accessibility. The elevator, you know, they don't have different use of the elevators, and it seems unfair. I think some of the classrooms are hard for her to maneuver. I tried to make blind spaces and would help her.
Oh, good. Thank you.
She was very nice in the comment, but it seems unfair that, you know, parking and some of these issues that the university could do, that they should have more. I don't know if there's a formula for the number of handicapped spaces, so what can be done to help this back this semester? I don't have her, but she was looking for a parking place the other day. That's horrible.
Have her get in touch with our office, and she may already be. I may know who you're talking about, because things change on this campus every day. There's 3 full-time professional staff in our office, and we have about 3 GAs that work with us too, but there's some things that they can't do. So when they make changes to parking or they make changes on campus, we're not always aware of it. Now there is a formula for how much parking you should have on campus, and I can tell you that we do have more than we're required by law to have. And Parking Services is very good to look at, okay, if we know, like my office is in LeConte, and we know that there are so many faculty, staff with disabilities, so they kind of, okay, we need 4 spots. And then because Disability Services is here, we probably need an extra 2. So in a parking lot of 10 spaces, we've got like 5 of the 10 spaces, which is 50%. But they're still always filled all the time. But there are some other things that we can do with students to kind of work out where to park or what to do. And occasionally we have gone in and they've made additional parking spaces if we could make the point. But if people don't let us know that there's a problem, we sometimes don't know. And our population changes every semester. We spend a lot of time working with the architects on the Darla Moore School of Business to try to make it accessible. The way the law works is when the ADA was passed in the early 90s, certain buildings were grandfathered in, and so now after 20 years, there's the new ADA regs just went into effect. So it's like buildings built before a certain time, you don't have to do anything to until there's major renovations, and the Coliseum falls into that category. Other buildings we've had to go in and make certain accommodations, and then buildings built from now on, there's a new standard that must be met that's very, very high in terms of making sure there's appropriate parking, appropriate lighting, and all kinds of things. And so we're trying as best we can as people bring situations to our attention to get them fixed. Like elevators, for example, it can cost $150,000, $200,000 for one elevator, but sometimes because of how the buildings are made, there's not a way to put one in. but we'll work with students. Sometimes we've moved classes from one building to another if a student says, I can't get into this class because there's not an elevator. So you may, 3 days before classes start, your class has been moved from this building to this building, and you're like, what the heck? And it's because we know there's a student who needed an elevator or needed some accommodation of some sort. So we can do those kinds of things. I'm trying to think of other things that have come up. Behavioral intervention team. A lot of times students will act out or misbehave in class, and faculty think that because a student has a disability, they sort of have to tolerate that kind of behavior, but you don't. And so you can either get in touch with our office or you can file a BIT report, and then we work with the BIT team to determine, was this student a student with a disability or not? If so, what's the appropriate accommodation? How do we deal with this? A lot of times we get referrals from them that say, this student had this situation. We've now become aware of a disability. Let's get them registered. So if a student comes to you and says, I've got any kind of condition, that might be their way of saying, I need help. So you can refer them to our office. What we find is that the minute you say the word disability, there's such a stigma. People are like, I don't have a disability. I don't need to go over there. But a lot of times if you can start out and say, there's an office that can help you. They've helped other students in the past. They've been able to help work with students to take a reduced course load, or they've been able to help work with parking or whatever. Why don't you go over and talk to Karen Pettis or Omar Troutman, Disability Services? Kind of gloss over it quickly, move right along. Here's their phone number, give them a call. Sometimes if you kind of tell them what we can do first, rather than just say, go over to Disability Services, because then they're like, well, I don't have a disability. I don't need to go over there. That might be helpful.
How often does it occur at all where the hospital identifies students based on their work or based on their behavior that they think may have something else going on, even though they've never received those assistance?
It happens very frequently. I would say we probably get 30, 40 phone calls a semester from faculty at some point in time who say, I have a student who says this or is doing this and I don't know what to do. How can I help them? And if they tell us the name, sometimes we'll look them up. It's kind of tricky sometimes where that educational need to know versus HIPAA versus FERPA comes into play. But a lot of times we'll work with you to help you come up with some wording or come up with something to say that can help get a student over to us so we can sit down and talk with them more specifically about what's going on and how we can maybe help them either get the documentation they need or get the support that they need or whatever.
So do you refer them out for assessment, or do you all have assessments?
We don't do the assessments in our office. We can refer them to vocational rehabilitation. Some students we can refer to the counseling center, depending on what the need is. Or some students we just need a letter from their doctor saying they're being treated for generalized anxiety disorder or for whatever the condition is. And then once we have that information, we'll ask the student to get us a letter from their doctor that sort of better outlines not just, oh, you have diabetes, but how does your diabetes impact you, or how does your bipolar disorder impact you? What might be some reasonable accommodations? And then we kind of go from there. And a lot of times once students find that there's a place to go and they feel like they have an ally, they seem to kind of, oh, I can manage this now. I know where to go. I know who can help me. And they come over to talk to us about all different kinds of things, and we'll say, well, you need to talk to this person in the registrar's office. You need to talk to the dean about this. Let's see how we can make this happen and work with them that way. Elise, yeah.
Quick question. Again, this is my first time dealing with this, so this is all new to me. Does your office provide any, just even a handout about the possible technologies that are available? Like, we're very lucky in that our student seems very technology savvy and knows what's going on, but it would be helpful as an instructor to be able to look at some of those technologies. I know some of them are really expensive, but maybe some of the free ones, so we can see what our content looks like using some of these other technologies.
We haven't put it together in that type of format, mostly because most faculty go, I don't know what this is, where your faculty is a little different, and they might be. But you're certainly welcome to come over to our office, and maybe we could do that, just put it on our website, you know, this is available, but you're welcome to come over to our office and we can show you what's there, you can play with it. I've also had the opportunity to talk with Susan Quinn in the College of Education, and she teaches their educational technology courses. So they have a lot of the same equipment that we have, and they were going to set up a room because we were trying to brainstorm in January, what the heck is this college, the Library of Information Science staff going to need? Oh my gosh. And so they were willing to set up a room with a computer so that faculty could go over there, and if you needed to make tapes or make PowerPoints or use Connect or whatever, that you know that could help you and have some support in making things accessible. You can come to our office as well. We have 2 computers that are available for use, and sometimes those are being used by students. So we thought that maybe having something available for faculty over at the Wardlaw, on the 2nd floor in Wardlaw, might be beneficial as well. I was hoping Susan was going to be here today, but that's something else that we can, but certainly call us and we can, yeah. Jed, anything you thought I would cover that I haven't?
No, I thought it was really interesting that you talked about the 3 common areas, the data proctors, some kind of help with the note taking, and the attendance issue, because I've experienced all 3 of those things, and each time it was very, very different. I had a student who just got paralyzed, and he would just sit down and just do this, and he would come to the class, and I didn't know what was going on, but his mother called me and said, you know, my son, he's got this problem, and we're taking him back and forth to the hospital in this other city, and so you know, what can you do for me? And I had to say, well, you know, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you about him in his educational records because he's an adult. So if you want, you know, you need to talk to your office. You know? Yeah. I never heard from any of that. He just disappeared. So I gave him an eye because I thought I'd been told that he was obviously sick, and so I gave him an eye. He eventually came back and loaded it up.
Oh, good.
And then I had a student who came and said, I need to record your lectures and what this little tape recorder is, and because I can't take notes. And I was like, I felt really uncomfortable having my voice recorded. I was afraid I was going to say something wrong. And so I was really very nervous about the whole thing, about what's they going to use this recording of my voice, you know, against me somehow. But I just let that go. It's fine, you know. It made me a little nervous, and so when I got over after the first test and he didn't come back and show me where I marked something wrong and played my voice back. But then the very first time when I worked with your office, I got a letter about a student that needed more time on a test. And the way that I handled that was I had the student meet me at the classroom where the test had just been administered when class was over, and then walked with me to a quiet place where he could take that test. So I figured there was a possibility that somebody might finish the test early and walk out and tell him what was on the test, but it wasn't likely that there would be a lot of time for that. And so I didn't have to make up that second test, but grabbed him right away as we were walking out.
Yeah.
Just wanted to share that.
And that's a really good idea. That's a good way to do it sometimes, because we tell students to, don't take classes back to back for that very reason, so that you've got some extra time.
A student could do that, yeah.
Yeah.
If it's been otherwise, I don't know what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned tests, like extra time for tests. What about extra time for, paper reads or things like that?
I actually had a question related to that too. What about when it comes, you have exams, but what if you have like short quizzes and things like that? Does that fall under that as well?
It's a basic grade.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes. Quizzes and things, we kind of work with the instructor. Sometimes we'll tell the student to go early and take the quiz prior to the class so that they can have their extra time. The nursing school did that a lot because they wanted, it was like everybody's going to take this 10-minute quiz And then we're going to talk about it, and that's going to be kind of the basis for our discussion today. We don't want you to miss the discussion, but you can't take the quiz after the discussion. You know, so we kind of try to do things, work with you and the student and the schedule and everything else to see what we can work out. Papers are very difficult things sometimes because people think, oh, I get extra time for everything. And we're like, no. We're having this discussion with a parent right now because my thing is if on the syllabus, on the first day of class, we tell you that you have a paper that's due on the last day of class, you've had a ton of time. Now, if something extraordinary happens, you're hospitalized, you're sick, you know, there's something that's outside of your control that cannot be helped, a death in the family, we might consider an extra weekend. But it's not turn in the paper whenever you want to. Now, some faculty, and I put myself in this category, I can see something on the TV tonight and go, oh, this perfectly relates to my class tomorrow. And I walk in and I go, oh, scrap what's on the lesson plan for today. We're going to talk about this, and I want you to write a reflection paper and bring it in tomorrow. Now, if I do something slightly ADD-ish like that, it's probably appropriate to let that person have some extra time to write that paper, you know. But if they've had plenty of time, they've had plenty of notice, they've had plenty of opportunities to get that paper written, we are very, 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 very less likely to say, yes, you can have extra time on that. Now, if you know, towards the end of the semester, there's a ton of papers going on, a ton of things going on. Occasionally, we've had some students that we've contacted faculty and said, there's some extenuating circumstances here, there's a death in the family or whatever. Can they have a couple of extra days just because it's taking them longer? Or my fear for you all, because they have a student who's deaf and blind, he has some vision, but he has to enlarge the print to a large degree. It's going to take him a lot longer to read the same content that it does me. Sometimes it just takes longer to get the materials, and it takes longer for us to get them converted. We may contact you and say, given the circumstances, let's give him some extra time. And certainly if it's my office's fault, we're going to let you know up front. I'll just tell you, we dropped the ball, or we can't get this done because we don't have the staff. But we're going to let you know. We're not going to leave you hanging out there that it was our fault that he didn't have the materials in a timely manner or something like that. But routine day to day, if you let them know at the beginning of the semester, they should be able to finish it by the end of the semester. Does that help? Because I know students think they should just be able to come in and say, I have a disability, you know, I have chronic hangnail syndrome, I can't write this paper. Explain to me how chronic hangnail syndrome keeps you from writing. That's what I need to know. It's not just, you know, any condition gets you whatever you want.
Has your office ever thought about a seminar that would help us on being able to identify some of these things? I have no background in learning disabilities. I was wondering if like, you know, reversing the letters, if there are other little things that maybe your staff could go over to help us try to identify, because I don't know what to look for except that. That maybe there's some things that even if the student hasn't filed, that maybe we could talk to them about or try to identify.
Sure, we could do that. Or you can come to our office and we'll be glad to sit down and talk with you. Yeah, that would be fine. We could do that.
Just kind of out of curiosity, how many students are identifying having a learning disability once they're in college that maybe they didn't recognize in high school, or it's more demanding?
It would be a small number, but there are a few. Maybe we may get 10 a year, maybe, because students who are very bright are able to pick things up and be successful. And in the public schools, how you get identified is if you're failing. And so if you're not failing, nothing's going to happen. And then all of a sudden people get here, the volume of reading, the volume of work is higher, the amount of papers and things they have to write is higher, and all of a sudden you have a really, really bright kid who's not doing well, and I can think of one right now that we're working with who just was identified. And you know, of course, the parents are feeling really bad. Oh, all this time and we didn't know. And I'm like, well, that's, you know, that's reasonable sometimes. But now that we do know, let's figure out what we can do to help. We're offering coaching now for students that we didn't offer in the past because so many students are needing more help with those kind of self-management things. And so we're offering that for students. They can meet with a coach as much as they want to help with those kinds of getting things done in a timely manner. How do I structure my day, my week, planning, those kinds of things.